Thank you, Senator Rhiannon. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. It's a great honour to stand up in unity with so many other senators in this chamber to condemn the economic lunacy of the Greens, because these guys are economic lunatics when it comes to this issue. It's not about the Liverpool Plains, this motion. This motion clearly says that the Greens want to call on all parties in New South Wales to ban coal mining. Ban coal mining in New South Wales. That would bankrupt the state of New South Wales. It would bankrupt this country, but the Greens don't care because they know nothing about economics. And you know you shouldn't believe anything they say on this issue, because this is a case where don't do as they say, don't do as they do, sorry, just do as they say. Because the Greens, I'm sure, like the rest of us, get planes to come here. I'm sure I've seen Green senators turn up to this place in cars. In cars. They've come here in cars, and I don't think they're solar panel-powered cars. I don't think we have those in the Comcar fleet. Today we heard in question time that the Greens referred to investments in roads in Victoria, in Melbourne, as a polluting road. I didn't realise that roads could pollute, but apparently they can pollute. Everything pollutes, according to the Greens. We've got a polluting road, so every time we're on a road we pollute. So why do the Greens actually get in a car and come to this place? Why do they use cars to come to this place, Senator Nash? I don't quite understand. If they're polluting doing that, why don't they come here from some other means? Now, I realise we don't necessarily have the facilities or infrastructure in this place to provide for the Greens' alternative modes of transport. For example, I have never seen, and maybe Senator O'Sullivan could correct me because I know him, he's a keen horseman, I've never seen a hitching post out the front of the Senate chamber for people. So maybe the Greens would like to ride their horse into the chamber one morning. Instead of getting in a car, they'd love to ride their horses, but we don't have any hitching posts. We don't have any hitching posts. So I'm sure this corner of the chamber, and I haven't taken this through our party room, but I'm sure the Nationals would support a motion for some hitching posts to be installed at the front of the Senate chamber so we can all ride our horses into the Senate and we don't have to rely on the evil fossil fuels that we all do today. Because the Greens do want to take us back to the Dark Ages. They don't believe in modern society. At least they don't. They talk about they don't believe in modern society. They're happy to live with the benefits of it, but they don't believe in steel because that's made from coal. They don't believe in cars because they're powered by petrol. They don't believe in modern agriculture because modern agriculture is actually powered by fossil fuels, and I'll get to that as well. The other thing that's interesting about this motion, because it actually calls for us to ban coal mining, and I remember during the last election campaign, the last federal election campaign, the Greens have all these spending proposals. They want to build a fast rail from Brisbane to Melbourne. That's about $100 billion. They want to introduce free dental care. It's another few $billion. All their promises added up to hundreds of billions of dollars. And when they're asked, as they of course would be by forensic media, when they're asked, how are you going to pay for all of those commitments? How are you going to pay for all their promises? You know what they say? Their response, their stock standard response, is we're going to put in place a mining tax. We're going to put in a mining tax to fund all the inland rail, the fast rail, from Brisbane to Melbourne. We're going to put in a mining tax to fund all of these multi-billion-dollar promises. Now, I don't know how a mining tax works when you don't have a coal mining industry. How is that going to raise any money if they want to ban the coal mining industry, but they're going to put on a mining tax to fund all their promises? That doesn't add up, Madam Acting Deputy President. Something is not quite right there, because if you believe you're going to fund everything from a mining tax, you must believe that you want to continue some form of mining, which is going to make money to pay the tax. Now, what the Greens just never say and never comment on is they always want to talk about the future, because they know they can confuse people about the future, because the future, of course, is indeterminate. So they talk about how we're going to have a future. I've heard Senator Rhiannon, who just contributes to this debate, I've heard her before say we can be 100% renewable by 2020 in Sydney. 100% renewable. I don't know what we're going to do when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, but we can be 100% renewable. But you can't argue about the past. The past is the fact of the matter, and you can't argue what's happened in the last 30 years across the globe. And in the last 30 years across the globe, we have used 40% more oil than in 1980. We have used, so 35 years actually, we have used 107% more coal. We've more than doubled our use of coal as a global economy, and we've used 131% more natural gas. All fossil fuels, all fantastic technologies that have pulled, as Senator Katter said before, and I fully support his comments, as Senator Katter said before, we have pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty across our globe. There are still hundreds of millions of people without access to electricity, any electricity, not dear electricity or cheap electricity or some electricity. No electricity. There's about 300 million people in India who do not have access to any electricity. In central Queensland recently, we just had a tropical cyclone go through Yeppoon and Rockhampton, and many of us were out of power for a week or more. My house was out of power for 6 days. And I tell you what, people understood what it was like to not have electricity. People understood. We've gotten a bit soft these days, probably. After 6 days, people were at their wits' end, not having air conditioning, not being able to easily refrigerate food or even cook food at all if you didn't have gas or some other source of electricity. People understood that actually we don't want to go back to the dark ages. It's actually a fantastic thing that people have access to cheap electricity to warm their homes for their families or cool them in hotter areas. That's a great thing, and it's a great advancement for human beings all around the world. And the only way we maintain that, is through access to cheap and affordable electricity, which right now is fossil fuels. You can't get away from the fact that if you want to have access to cheap, permanent, consistent electricity across 24 hours a day, across 365 days a year, you need to use fossil fuels. It's a basic scientific fact right now. So I say, let's listen to the science and support those industries that provide those great benefits to the whole globe. And it's not just access to cheap electricity for people to turn on their lights and their air conditioners and power their cars. It's actually also to have food as well. Because the Greens love to talk about how, the black soil plains look fantastic. It's fantastic to see a wheat crop grow when you drive past it on your way back to Sydney. But they never actually understand how this stuff works and how it is grown, how people actually turn what is a barren, sometimes treed area of land into something which produces food for millions of people around the world. We produce food, enough food to feed 60 million people around the globe. How do we do that? We do that by converting energy into food. That's all farmers do. They take energy that's in the soil, that's in the ground, that's in organic matter, and turn that into products which human beings can eat, whether that's through a cow that can eat grass and turn that into protein, or whether it's into nitrogen being turned into a wheat crop. That's all farmers do. But it takes a lot of hard work because when you look at modern food production, the fact that we can feed a lot of people around the world very easily today, much more than we could 100 years ago, a lot of energy goes into it. There was a study done in the United States. I've never been able to find one for Australian cropping, but in the United States someone showed that it takes actually 100 kilograms of oil equivalent to produce 1 tonne of wheat. So that's taking into account all of the fertiliser, the tractors, the diesel that's used, the electricity to irrigate a hectare of land. It's 100 kilograms of oil equivalent of power. Now that's their metric. We tend to use metric rather than imperial measures, and if you convert that to our measures, it's 4 gigajoules of power for 1 tonne of wheat. Now, what does that mean in cost terms? Well, the urea that is used, and urea is just basically taking nitrogen out of the air, which is all around us. More than 70% of the air around us today is nitrogen, and you can compress that through a basic technology into urea, which can be used, which is now then a physical form of nitrogen, which can be used to replenish land to then grow crops or grass or whatever you want to grow in it. That costs about $5 to $10 a gigajoule to convert urea using natural gas to convert nitrogen into urea. The diesel used for tractors, if you convert petrol prices to gigajoule terms, it's about $30 per gigajoule. And irrigation, which just often uses diesel-powered or sometimes network electricity, is about $60 a gigajoule. All up, when you add all those things together and their relative uses in the production of a wheat crop, it costs around $80 a tonne in energy inputs for 1 tonne of wheat. $80 a tonne is what our wheat is made up of. So the food we eat, the cereal we eat, it costs about $80 a tonne to produce that. And the actual wheat price itself, and I just checked before I came in here, it's about $250 a tonne, which is a little bit more in Australian dollar terms these days. But still, somewhere around a third or a quarter to a third of the price of wheat, the final value of wheat after it leaves the farm, is embodied in energy. And if we don't have access to cheap energy, we won't have access to cheap food, and we won't be able to feed people. And all these farmers that the Greens pretend to represent won't be able to make a profit because we'll be producing wheat at much higher costs. We won't be able to sell on the world price because we export most of our wheat, and they'll be out of a job. They'll be out of a job, they'll be off their farm, and they won't be able to employ all the people they do when they produce food for our nation. But the Greens think it'll all be okay because We won't use we won't use natural gas to make urea anymore. We won't use diesel to power our tractors. We'll use wind and solar for everything. We'll use wind and solar for everything we do. Now, the Greens always like to present wind as some form of virgin, absolutely pure, clean form of energy. But when you drive past a wind turbine next time, just think about how much steel has to be made, how much concrete has to be manufactured to make a wind turbine. What makes steel? It's coking coal and iron ore. And in this motion, the Greens want to ban coal mining. So you won't be able to make steel anymore. If we ban coal mining, there'll be no more steel, there'll be no more wind turbines. But even if you did allow some steel production still to occur in some developing country somewhere, a wind turbine takes around 460 tonnes of steel to make. One wind turbine, 460 tonnes of steel. Sorry, that's wrong. Sorry, I've misread my notes. Each megawatt of wind power produced takes around 460 tonnes of steel. And each megawatt of wind power takes around 870 cubic metres of concrete as well as an input into the production of that megawatt of power. Now let's compare that to natural gas. Natural gas takes 27 cubic metres of concrete and 3.3 tonnes of steel. So wind, 460 tonnes of steel per megawatt. Natural gas, 3.3 tonnes. Wind, 870 cubic metres of concrete. Natural gas, 27 cubic metres of concrete. Which one is more environmentally friendly? Which one will ultimately use less resources and take less of an environmental impact on our manufacturing processes and our mining processes as well, which are needed to make steel? Because under the Greens policy and the Labor Party policy at the moment, they want us to get to a renewable energy target, which is basically unachievable, but we need around another 3,860 megawatts of wind to be installed by 2020 to do it, and that will take, on those sums that I read out before, 1.8 million tonnes of steel. That's enough steel to build 35 aircraft carriers. We'd be using the same amount of steel before 2020 in wind turbines as to actually manufacture 35 aircraft carriers. And I think I know which one of those options would be of more use to Australia. But they don't care about all the facts in this debate because they're on an emotional campaign to touch into people's dreams of having not to rely on dirty mining or unfortunate things we have to do, but still maintain our standard of living, which is an absolute impossibility. And that we've heard all this before in regional Australia. We've heard all of this before, and I want to finish by quoting from a letter to the Land today. I think it might have been. No, it was today in the Land, which points out that around 30 years ago, the Greens ran a campaign in exactly the same area we're talking about in Liverpool Plains, in Gunnedah, to ban the use of crop dusting for an aerial spraying for cotton and other crops. They wanted to ban that, and this letter from Jeff Swain at Carroll rightfully points out that some people have very short memories. Do they not recall how the former state government and the Greens, with a tacit approval of the then independent member for Tamworth, combined to lock up the Pilliga, which is a forest up there? Have they forgotten the devastation caused to the timber industry? How about the native vegetation laws, which have impacted so heavily on farmers in New South Wales? And that's exactly right, because the Greens in this debate don't care about the people that rely on the mining sector to provide their jobs, that rely on the timber sector to provide jobs, to people that wouldn't have a lot of other options otherwise. They only care about their votes in the inner city, mainly votes which rely on massive amounts of fossil fuels to power their lifestyles and continue their comfortable livelihoods.
Thank you, Senator Canavan. That was a nice conclusion.